I'm going to introduce and then let Dean do a little background of his experience, which will kind of lead into, I think, where both of us feel the opportunity is in the space. So this is Dean Waters, CEO of Flowertown.
Hi, guys.
Will you give us a little bit of your background, Dean?
Sure. I started as a media buyer. I then worked in the cable industry for about 14 years. And then I started a destination lifestyle platform called Vimby, which is an acronym for Video in My Backyard. 3 years into that, I partnered with Mark Burnett and became the Mark Burnett Content Studio for about 9 years, and had the luxury of working with him and storytelling and all reality-based, helping big brands connect with consumers through storytelling that was meaningful and building new connections. And through that, a long career in media and marketing here in Los Angeles, dove into cannabis in a big way, and been fortunate to build a team of some of my most favorite peers from ad agencies around the country that have joined Flowertown. And we've taken the first 12 months of pretty much most of 2018 to build our brand and to kind of identify our swim lanes and what we wanted to do. Not going to lie, we've course corrected a couple times just based on the volatility of the industry. Certainly the uncertainty in California, there's legal issues, there's law enforcement issues, there's black market issues, there's a lot. And as marketers, we've fell back on launching Flowertown as a brand of trust and safety for the new consumer. And with that, we felt that our priorities are very much that Refinery 29 model, Vice, Vox, platform plus agency plus social. And our platform, I encourage you to check it out. It's flowertown.com. It's built for the new consumer. It's unique. It's well lit. We'll never say certain words. We'll never show partaking. We are truly focused on what we call kind of rejectors in the marketplace. There's also a group called acceptors, which we'll get into, which are people that might take something from you, but would never walk into a retail store to make a purchase. They're not comfortable. And then there's a chunk, roughly 30%, that are consumers, which are also, a stat came out, maybe 30 days ago, that 80% of the transactions in California are happening at rogue dispensaries. If you're going to a black market dispensary, you're buying black market products, which is a concern. So at Flowertown, and I'm sorry this is long-winded, it really is about guiding new consumers, curating experiences based on trust. So that's been roughly the past 16 months. Vimby is still very much alive, and it's a very large content marketing company with general market brands that we work with that is locally based in 85 cities, 6 regions internationally, and that's our storytelling engine for Flowertown, because I think at the end of the day, we all know the biggest issue in cannabis right now is telling stories. And then Judson and I have known each other for a really long time. We recently have reconnected with where he's at, what I'm doing, and trying to crack some codes.
So yeah, we'll touch on how Dean and I connected last fall around this category. But I've spent 20 years building, selling, and activating marketing programs for top brands and agencies here in LA and the West region. And when I joined Open Influence, Dean and I reconnected over dinner and realized that there might be an opportunity there to see how we can responsibly address this category. So I'll back up a little bit and sort of substantiate where Flowertown feels a large opportunity is from a revenue standpoint, but also the education-based piece of what Dean just mentioned. And that is, last fall, MedMen, I don't know if any of you have read the article, but they committed $4 million in Los Angeles to show their retail outlets and high-end shopping districts, and they're using influencer marketing to do that. One of the challenges that was highlighted in this article, and I think that Dean has faced as he's looked at this vertical, is that influencers are still anxious about getting tied up with weed products, even if they use the product. So, Dean, I guess I would start by asking you, as you sort of talked about acceptors, rejectors, and these new consumers, what do you think is really if you could narrow it down, what do you feel is the number one objective these new cannabis companies should be focused on now?
Well, building brands. There's a few brands that are starting to do consumer marketing, but most cannabis brands have grown a good product, manufactured a good product, whether, obviously CBD is emerging, but They've got shelf space, they have child-safe packaging, they're being lab tested, they're educating bud tenders or dispensary agents, whatever you want to call them, and it kind of stops there. There's no true consumer marketing strategies. So through our conversations, and we went public-facing in February of this year because we spent a lot of time building a toolkit of ways that we can help and what we can do in this industry. Our biggest thing is, in every consumer industry, there's love marks, right? We all, for our computers, our cars, our clothes, beauty products, whatever it might be. In cannabis, and we've done a lot of man on the street, there's very little brand recall. And obviously there's challenges with building a national brand because of the state-to-state issue with cultivation. So for us, it's about storytelling, it's about content, it's about building emotional connections with consumers. And we believe Flowertown is a third party, not being plant touching, not being a retail, but being a voice for the consumer. We like to think a little bit of good housekeeping. It's a tall mountain to climb, but we want to be that voice of trust and safety. So I think it's brand building. I think, and we're seeing, especially here in California, commoditization. Nobody's driving value. Nobody's driving the market. We've talked to dozens of brands. There's no foundational work with consumer strategies at all. Their identity, who they are. They have these ambassadors that go around and educate bud tenders. And if they had 15 ambassadors, each ambassador would have a different story of what that brand is. So I think building brands is the big thing. And I think you're going to see a lot of these brands go away too. A lot of them are going to, consolidation's happening. We're seeing real money's being invested. And, so I think there's a cleansing that'll happen too.
So that kind of brings us to why we're here, right? Is influencer marketing a game changer in the category? I think some would argue that one of the reasons that CBD or hemp or THC or cannabis companies are in this space is because they're so limited in where they can advertise. Would you argue potentially, well, maybe you can address that given, your experience in advertising. I know you've been, in the digital space, you've been in the traditional space, but I would also ask you to address, do you think that's going to give these guys a head start in brand building given the power of influencer marketing?
And you've seen it here today. Trust that's what influencers are about, right? And if the new consumer, even existing consumer, I think it's important for existing consumers to be driven back to safe legal retail just to make sure they're consuming safe products that have been lab tested. But it's tricky. Yeah, I lost train of my thought of your question.
Did you have some CBD before you came up here?
No, I did not. But what was your question? I'm sorry.
Well, it was more around the idea that I think some would argue that it's going to give the category, the cannabis category, and that's the broad category of CBD, hemp, et cetera, maybe a jump start to be forced into influencer marketing.
Yeah, so, I think cannabis brands are looking if they can find a way in with influencers and give them product, and most influencers won't touch it, right? Because why would they? They're not going to push transactions. Some of the guide rails are not pushing transactions, doing direct deals. But influencers are storytellers. Influencers do have trust, and so we've looked in a way of, and what we've learned at Flowertown and Vimby is integration with brands and products through storytelling and building relationships with consumers. If we can be that bridge between the influencer and the consumer of just doing educational stories based on consumers understanding the health and wellness benefits of cannabis. So it's not a fit for every brand, right? Not every brand can be a part of our storytelling because we want to be responsible, right? And we got to respect open influence, respect the influencers, and even if we get into brand protection, right? We give every influencer a handbook of the brand, who we are, lightly scripting, the benefits of the product, why we're doing this, if it's based on fitness, that we have a responsibility as marketers to make sure that we're upholding to our standards to focus on health and wellness.
So would you argue that, like any consumer or CPG category, the cannabis category has to follow those same principles in brand building?
Of course.
And then aside from regulation, do you see anything unique to the category, and maybe address how influencer marketing may help that?
We believe, and we've done some early testing, and the results have been kind of a 3x of the industry average. We believe it's due to our storytelling that's in between the influencer and the follower, and developing assets that are meaningful and that are educational.
And arguably a safe environment to educate oneself about
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
products, how to use them, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's just the curiosity on behalf of the new consumer. I think they get the endorsement of the person they follow and they trust, and then they get a dose of storytelling. And we might do a listicle, we might do editorial, we might do a mini doc, and we kind of A/B test, and then we kind of, as we all do, double down on what's working best. And believe it or not, video is not first. The editorial piece is done really, really well. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, when Veronica mentioned earlier from L'Oreal mentioned that she's really trying to focus away from product and more on storytelling, and for cosmetics. For you to say the same thing, but I think it must be two-tier, right? I think there's a lot of education in the space around the product itself, and then how have you seen the brands that you're working with tell their story? How are they differentiating themselves? I know it's a land grab right now in the space.
It's a tricky balance because there's a lot of brands that have momentum and they're further along and they don't want to take 5 steps back to build any sort of foundational, consumer strategies of who they are. So, you try and step in, at step 5 with a brand, with an influencer campaign, and at the same time, we need to write a brief. We need to build a campaign idea that we feel suits the brand and certainly suits the audience on the influencer side. So it's, we've had success with that, and it's, there's learnings along the way, but, I think the brands have been open and they get the fact, and, one of the biggest things they love about what we're doing with you guys as we're starting to experiment is just the level of professionalism. Right, and the postmortem, the data, the analytics, not just throwing products at influencers that is giving them exposure. While we're about brand exposure, brand affinity, we're also about guaranteeing results in the way of actions or, again, it's tricky because we're not driving people to dispensaries. It's educational, but if these brands are seeing an uptick on their site and they realize there is a journey with this new consumer, it's not overnight. So you need to be committed to it, and then you run into the issue of budgets, right? Cannabis brands, most of them are in fundraisers. There's some larger companies that are entering the space that are multi-state operators that make it more interesting, but it's finding the right balance.
So how have you found that balance in a space where people are hesitant to participate, right? So you talked about the trust and sort of the brand protection piece. We also know that applies to influencers wanting to be involved with these brands. So how have you overcome that? And I believe part of that answer you've already stated, and that is you've created a site, right, a destination where people can go get information. It's a safe environment. It's not focused on product. It's focused on education. But when you converse with influencers, or as we converse with influencers, how have you addressed overcoming that hesitation?
Well, the biggest thing is giving you guys the confidence in us that we're never going to jeopardize anything, right? And for us, it's curating the right brands that we believe are going to, make it through, per se, that we believe have really, really good products and go through the motion. But, the first identifier for us is, do you have money? Do you have budgets? And because there is a lot of, there's a lot of talk in the industry. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced in my career, but it's the most exciting time in my career at the same time. So there's some qualifiers, and I think making sure these brands stand for health and wellness, making sure these brands actually have benefits to consumers. We're not exploring just the rec market. We want to explore products that help us tell better stories and do more educational approaches.
I love that we have a hand raised because we were going to be the first to solicit some feedback from the group. So please.
Hi, I'm just kind of curious, what's everybody so nervous about? Like, how is this so different from alcohol? I mean, right, there's tons of influencers for alcohol.
Right.
Why is everybody so nervous?
The federal government. It's Schedule I drug federally. It's legal in roughly 29 states, medical or recreational. So anybody who's a publicly traded company, hence the large holding companies, they're not entering the space yet, just due to the federal government. So,
And in, like, the states.
Yep.
I mean, like the fear.
Yeah. Well, it's just the traditional mediums aren't accepting it, right? So we're saying, well, hey, we just want to be educators. We want to act like good housekeeping and stick to kind of our script of who we are and what we want to represent. And it's working. I mean, it's slow going. The runway got longer just because the industry's going through a transformation. You know, not everybody's going to make it through, but there are challenges because of the federal government. It's still considered a Schedule I drug. So.
Right, and so we saw a change in December with CBD being declassified as a Schedule I drug. And at that point, you know, you're seeing it carried in CVSs all over the country. So you tackle each of these categories slightly differently.
Yeah, I mean, hey, with the hemp bill happening and CBD being descheduled, it gives these cannabis brands that are better situated an opportunity to launch a CBD product that's been descheduled federally, so they can now launch a national net, you know, and start marketing their brand in non-rec or medical markets. And then when those markets do convert, boom, they can introduce THC-based products. So, you know, it's definitely exciting, but then it's real budgets, right? Marketing costs money. So it's, you know, I think you're seeing a lot of money enter the space. A lot of traditional people are being hired. You know, moves are being made, but their people are also cautious. You know, if I'm a brand and I look at California and the state of 1,000 illegal dispensaries, only a couple hundred legal ones, the illegal ones are not charging a state tax. The legal ones are. They've lost their entire previous patient base when it was medical, and they're all struggling. So it's,
so
you know,
Dean, we're close to time.
Okay.
If we can bring it back to the influencer, the relevance of influencer marketing in the space as these companies build brands, touch on that as kind of a final note, and where do you see things, or what's your prediction, you know, in the category in the next 3 to 5 years?
God, a month in this space is like 9 months anywhere else. So 3 to 5 years, I can't even tell you 6 months from now.
3 to 5 months?
But I think you're going to see a cleansing. I think certain brands are going to get it. And as they get traditional people working for them or understand the value of marketing, you know, we're excited. We're having incredible conversations with brands. I think they're seeing our value with what we have to offer. We've adjusted our thinking to cannabis budgets. Even though we come from traditional markets, we realize that it is different. So there's some brands we want to bet on and want to help. You know, me and our executive team have worked in very crowded markets and have moved the needle for some of the biggest box retail stores and CPG companies. So, you know, for us, it's about aligning with good companies. You know, our early revenues have come from our ad agency, flowertownagency.com, and our influencer network. The platform is, you know, it's more investment there. There's some organic growth. It's really good. It's kind of our business card at this point of what we stand for. But it's a tough prediction, man. I think from June on this year, you're going to see things start to uptick from the budget standpoint. I think you're going to see some brands probably go away. I think the second half of the year is going to be really interesting and really exciting, and I think you're going to see some new ad agencies emerge, potentially other influencer networks that want to enter the space. They're going to get wind of, you know, I think the responsible collaboration that we're doing.
So we'll have a lot to talk about in the second annual Open Influence Summit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got the red sign going.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Dean, you'll be around if anybody has any additional questions. All right.
Thank you.
You guys.